Hi, I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation and welcome back to the Hive. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Shelly 1 and Shelly Plus ones. As always, we'll take a look around the box, we'll see what's inside the boxes, and then we'll get them wired up and paired to the native Shelly app, and then we'll take a look at how well they work in Home Assistant. I'll also see if I can figure out the difference between the Shelly 1 and the Shelly 1 Plus while we're here. Now, we've already seen the Shelly Dimmer and the Shelly 1 PM already, and we looked at those on mains voltage. So this time I'm going to be concentrating on the DC functionality of the Shelly 1 and Shelly Plus 1, and a couple of reasons why the DC functionality might be something to consider. So while I roll the intro, why don't you take a moment to subscribe? And if you hit the bell icon, you'll get notified when I release new videos each week. While you're at it, if you like what I do here and you want to help to support the channel, there's some affiliate links in the video description for home automation gadgets that I've reviewed in the past, and other ways to support the channel, like signing up for NordVPN using my affiliate link, or supporting the channel directly through my Buy Me a Coffee link. With all of that out of the way, let's get started. So for the third video in my Shelly series, I picked up these two Shellys, the Shelly 1 and the Shelly 1 Plus. The Shelly 1 cost me $20 from ScorpTech, and the Shelly Plus 1 was $39 from ScorpTech. Now, they are a little bit more expensive on Amazon, but I will be putting some affiliate links into the description if you don't mind paying a little bit extra for the convenience of Amazon, and that also helps you to support the channel at the same time. So let's start by taking a look at both boxes. On the outside of the box, we've got the Shelly 1 Plus here, and there's a picture of the Shelly 1 Plus relay switch 16 amp Wi-Fi and Bluetooth ×1. So we've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth there. And this one says Shelly 1 ×1 Wi-Fi relay switch 16 amp. So I suspect the key difference may be that the Shelly 1 Plus has the Bluetooth function. Over here we've got www.shelly.cloud. On the front of the box, Shelly Plus 1 relay switch 16 amp Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, make IoT simple. This one just says make IoT simple and designed and developed in the EU. On this side, where we've got specs for the Plus 1, we've got a 16 amp relay. It runs on AC 110 to 240 volts, DC 12 volts, or DC 24 to 240 volts. So that's interesting. Power consumption is less than 1.2 watts. The RF power output is 13.45 dBm. The SSL connectivity is there. We've got Bluetooth, intelligent on-off. We've got an embedded web server, Wi-Fi frequency between 2412 to 2472 megahertz, so 2.4 gigahertz, and a maximum Wi-Fi frequency of 2495 megahertz, and Wi-Fi 802.11bgn, cloud service for remote access services and backup. For the Shelly 1, we've got 16 amp relay, 110 to 240 volts. And we start to see a little bit of divergence here straight away. So we've got DC 12 volts or DC 24 to 60 volts. So where the Shelly Plus 1 can go 24 to 240 volts, the Shelly 1 can only do up to 60 volt. We've got 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, open source, intelligent on-off, embedded web server, and SSL connectivity, and there's no mention of Bluetooth here. Not a whole lot going on this side. We've got Shelly Plus 1 by 1 and Shelly 1 by 1. An address for Altico Robotics in Bulgaria. There's other compliance data on here, so things like the recyclability, don't throw it in the trash. The Plus 1 shows that it's for indoor use only. I'm going to assume that the Shelly 1 is also for indoor use only. Lastly, we've got the QR code to download and install the Shelly app, and copyright from Altico Robotics. All rights reserved, designed and developed in the EU. And on the Shelly 1, we've got the website for arobotics.io. And on the bottom, not a whole lot there. It complies with some EU standards. So with the outside of the box out of the way, let's open up the boxes and take a look at the units themselves. So I'll start with the Shelly 1, and we'll get that opened up. And right on top, we've got the Shelly support group QR code to join the Facebook support group. Now, this one has a warning label in here that says, please check the position of the jumper before installing the device. Follow the installation instructions in the user guide. Now, this relates to the DC voltage jumper, and I'll take a look at that in a moment, because if you do plug 24 volts or more into this when you have it set to 12 volts, you will blow it up. We've got the unit itself, so very similar to the Shelly 1 PM. We've got our contact with the plastic guard there, and underneath here we've got our GPIO pins accessible. Underneath this little cover here is the jumper that it mentions here to make sure that it's in the right spot. So we'll take a look at that when we get to wiring it up. On the bottom, we have our certificate of conformity number and the QC details there. There's not a whole lot going on with this one. The certificate of conformity is important for Australian households because this means that you can wire this in with your 240 volt power. So with the Shelly 1 done, let's take a look at the Shelly Plus one. So I will open that up. And again, right on top, we've got the Shelly support group Facebook QR code. And then we go straight to the unit itself. We don't have that warning sheet. So I'll pop the unit out. And we've got the EVA foam. So again, with the Shelly 1, we've got the EVA foam. And then we've got the setup guides and the mobile application guides as well. So looking at the two units side by side, we can see that there's some fairly obvious differences. For the Shelly 1, we've got only the 5 screw down terminals, whereas the Shelly Plus one has 6 screw down terminals. The Shelly 1 has neutral live switched in and out. Whereas the Shelly Plus one has neutral live 12 volts switched and in and out. Now, what's different between the Shelly 1 PM and the Shelly Dimmer that we've seen in the past is that these Shellys only switch the in and the out on these two terminals here. So this input and this output goes through the relay. So when we turn the switch on, it's only connecting these two terminals together. Essentially what we've got here is very similar to the DIY switch we made with the ESP01S relay board in a previous video. However, we've got them in a nice case, and with the certificate of conformity, this means that they can also be wired into Australian mains wiring. So if I take a quick look at the Shelly 1 wiring guide, let's have a look here. So we can see here that if we are running the 110 to 240 volt AC power, we need to be bridging the two lower terminals on this jumper. And if we are running 12 or 24 to 60 volts, so 12 volts, we need to bridge the upper two. 24 to 60, we need to bridge the lower two. So if I open that up, I'll just use my fingernail there, and we take a close look. A bit hard to see there. We are on the lower two, so this is the default setting. It's set up to do either 24 to 60 or 110 to 240 volts AC. Now you'll also notice that we've got neutral and live marked here, but if you look closely, there's positive and negative, and interestingly, the positive is on the neutral and the negative is on the live, and that appears to be the same here for the Shelly Plus one. The positive is on neutral and the ground is on live. So with these Shellys out of the box and we've taken a look around, let's take a look at wiring them up to some DC voltage. Before we get into wiring them up though, from the 11th to the 13th of March 2023, I will be at the Train and Hobby Show at Sandown Racecourse and Entertainment Centre in Melbourne's southeast. The Train and Hobby Show showcases the best hobbies in Australia, from model railways, ham radio and electronics, radio control models, makers, and arts and crafts. And this year, for the very first time, the Train and Hobby Show is adding computing and home automation into the mix. I'll be at the Train and Hobby Show for all 3 days, and I'll have demos of gadgets like light bulbs, smart switches, and more. We'll have some basic automations set up to showcase some of the simple automations that you can do in your own home. I'll have some Raspberry Pis. I'll have a Raspberry Pi running Home Assistant and a Raspberry Pi demonstrating my Grafana dashboard for energy and environmental monitoring that I already have in place here at home. So if you are in Melbourne from the 11th to the 13th of March 2023, come on down to Sandown Racecourse and say hello. Get your tickets today at trainandhobbyshow.com.au. That's trainandhobbyshow.com.au. And now back to the Shellys. Now, as I mentioned before, for both of these, I'm going to be setting them up with DC, and I'll do them one at a time, but we don't necessarily need the warnings that we've done previously because we're not working with mains voltage this time. I'm going to be running both of these on 24 volts, and so we'll start with the Shelly 1. Now, for both of these, you can run them off 12 volts. But as we saw with the Shelly one, we need to move a jumper for that to work. Now for my supply, I'm going to be powering this setup using my lab power supply that just runs off an old computer power supply here, just an ATX 20-pin connector. I bought this little power supply unit ages ago for some experiments, and it is serving its purpose today. So the way this is going to work, I have this strip of 12 volt LEDs here. I'm just going to plug these into the power strip that I've got here. I've just got positive 12 volts and a ground here that are going to be going straight to the LED strip. And I've also got into this terminal block positive 12 volts and negative 12 volts, which, thanks to maths, means that we've got 24 volts of potential here. So then what I'll be doing is powering the Shelly one off 24 volts DC, and we'll be switching 12 volts DC. And this is one of the big benefits of having that isolated relay inside here. So just to demonstrate what this is going to do, or what we're going to attempt to do, I'm going to turn this power supply on with this button here, and we should get light out of the 12 volts. So we're just running 12 volts straight from the power supply into this LED strip. So I'll turn that off and we'll wire the Shelly one up now. And I'll start by putting the negative 24 volts into the live terminal here, because that's what's marked as negative. And I will screw that down. And I have a positive 12 volts here, and that will go into the neutral terminal, which is marked as positive. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 12 volts from here and put that into my input terminal there and screw that down. And I'll take this other 12 volts that goes to the LED strip and put that into the output terminal there. So I hope that makes sense. We've got positive 12 volts going into neutral on the Shelly, negative 12 volts going into live on the Shelly, making for 24 volts DC between these two terminals. And then we've got positive 12 volts going into the input terminal, and then that will go through the relay, which when switched will allow the output to go to 12 volts. And then that should be able to turn on this LED strip. So now I will turn the power on to the unit and hopefully nothing goes bang. Okay, that's good news. Nothing went bang. Okay, so now if I head over to my iPhone here and I'll pull up the Shelly app, and in the top right corner I'll tap the 3-dot stack or the hamburger menu, and I'll tap add device. And we're on the HiveMind IoT network, which is the 2.4 gigahertz only network, and I'll tap next. And I want to join a Shelly 1, so I will tap 1. And it wants to join the Shelly 1 network, and I'll tap join. Okay, so now we can choose a device name. I'm going to leave it at Shelly 1. I'll tap next. We'll leave it in our test room. I'll tap next, and we can upload an image. I'm not going to bother. I'll just tap done. And pending connection on this Shelly 1, and I'll just drill in, and it says the device is pending its first connection to the cloud. If no contact is made soon, you can try to reboot the device or check the device Wi-Fi settings. I'm not too worried about the cloud connection. There we go. It has logged in to the cloud, but it's telling us that there's an unsupported firmware version and we need to update it. Before we do that though, we've got our buttons here and we can turn the LED strip on and off. I'm going to tap update and allow the Shelly 1 to update. Okay, so now that the Shelly 1 has updated, we've got all of the usual suspects in here. We've got our timers for auto on and auto off. We've got our schedules for weekly timers in there. We've got our IO actions for our webhooks. We've got our internet settings, so we can set our number 1 and the number 2 Wi-Fi access points or Wi-Fi SSIDs for failover redundancy there, which is nice. We can set our access point details, our Wi-Fi AP roaming functionality. We can restrict the login for the web interface with a username and password, and we can enable or disable the cloud settings. And then there's the application settings, the share settings, and then into the actual settings of the device, we've got eco mode. We've got our power on default, so we can either run it as on, off, restore last mode, or based on the switch details. I don't have a switch wired up to this right now, so the switch mode wouldn't really do anything. Let's just leave it as restore last mode. For button type, I'm going to set that to detached because we don't actually have a button set up. Long push, time to register a long push is 800 milliseconds by default, and you can change that. You can enable an external switch, which I believe, yeah, okay, so you can see choose external switch add-on interface icon for a basic door or a garage. You can reverse the switch direction, so that's interesting. Our geolocation and time zone, you can automatically detect those. The appliance type, we can go general, relay, light, socket, heating, or entertainment. We can change the device name, and that will reflect in the device name if the application sync name setting is applied. We can change the channel name, so that's the channel on the relay. We can update the firmware. We can factory reset the unit. We can reboot the device, and there's some device info there. And we can see that we are on the IP address of 192.168.1.169. So 168.1.169. So if I open that in a web browser, you'll see we get the same details here. So we can go into our settings and modify all those settings, or we can turn the LED strip on and off using that web interface. Okay, so that is the Shelly 1. Let's do the same thing for the Shelly Plus one. I will disconnect the neutral, or the positive and the negative. And I'll also disconnect the switched lines there. And we'll move them over into the Shelly Plus one. Okay, so we've essentially got the same wiring with the Plus one. We've got our positive into the neutral terminal, our negative into the live terminal. We've got no 12 volts or no switched, and we've got our 12 volt supply into the eye, and our load hanging off our output there. We could have just run 12 volts positive into the 12 volt terminal there, and kept our ground on the live terminal there, rather than running negative 12 volts. And this unit would work just the same. So with the wiring set up almost identical to the Shelly 1, with the exception of the possibility of using that 12 volt input there. Back over on my iPhone, I'm going to tap on the hamburger menu in the top right and go to Add Device. We're on our HiveMind IoT network again, and I'll tap Next. And I need to find the Shelly 1 Plus in here. There we are, plus 1. So I will tap on plus 1. And it's asking us to join that network, which I will do. And we've got a device name of Shelly Plus 1. I won't bother changing that. We'll leave it in our test room. We won't bother with an image, and we'll tap Done. So now with our Shelly Plus 1, it is pending connection. If we drill in, it's actually managed to connect. It's not prompting us for a firmware update, but if I tap the on button and off, that is all switching nicely. And again, we've got all of the same stuff. We've got timer, schedule, IO actions, etc. If we drill into the settings specifically, we've got input-output settings. So we can select the input button switch mode, and we can set the relay power on default details there. So that's a little bit different from the previous one, where we had those as separate items in the settings. We've also got invert switch, so we can invert the switch logic. Again, we're not running a switch on this one, so it's not really relevant. We can change our device name. We can set our appliance type again. We've got the firmware version, and we can check for an update in there. And it's showing that there is an available stable version. I'll worry about that a little later. Geolocation and time zone, it's figured out that we are in the Sydney time zone, which is correct. And we've got device reboot, factory reset, and device information. And this time we are on an IP of 192.168.1.63. So I'll grab that again, 192.168.1.63. And we've got, again, the same things, some scripts. There's some channel settings, timers, schedules, webhooks, device settings, the network settings, and scripts. I won't worry about that. We'll just back out to the main page, and we can turn the light on and off. So now that we've got both devices paired to the native app, I'm only going to worry about the Shelly Plus one for integrating into Home Assistant. The process for the Shelly 1 should be pretty much exactly the same. If I head over to my Home Assistant instance here, this is my demo instance, we'll head into the settings menu. and then we'll go into devices and services, and I will scroll through here, and we've got a discovered Shelly plus one, and there's also the discovered Shelly one, but that's not going to be online right now because we've disconnected power from it. I'm going to tap on configure next to the Shelly plus one, and it says not fully provisioned, so that's a little bit interesting. What I might do is update the firmware and see how that goes. Okay, so it seems we have a bit of a problem with the Shelly Plus one. Let's try the Shelly one. Okay, so I've got the Shelly one wired back up now. So I will just make sure that that is functioning. It is turning the load on and off. And we'll back out, and I'll just refresh my Home Assistant discovery page here, and I'll see what happens if I hit configure next to the Shelly one. So this one's not complaining about not being fully provisioned. There might be something I'm missing in the steps to onboard the Shelly Plus one. I may just need to run through that process again or hit the factory reset and start the process from the beginning. So I'll tap submit on here. It's said that we've found the following device. I will put this into my test room and click finish. And now if we scroll down to the Shelly integration, we've got the Shelly one, and I'll drill into that, and I'll go to the one device. And for the one device, we've got our controls. So we've got on and off. This is really quick, by the way. This is just lightning fast in the responsiveness. That local control is very, very responsive indeed. And we've got some sensors. So we've got the input sensor. Now this one in our current wiring configuration doesn't make sense because I don't actually have a switch wired up. So there's no need for me to enable that sensor. In our configuration section, we've got our reboot, and we can just press the button to reboot. And we've got two hidden entities here. We've got a beta firmware upgrade and a regular firmware upgrade there. And those are both hidden at the moment. We've got our diagnostic section, and we've got three hidden entities there. We've got our cloud status, which is going to be either on or off. And then we've got RSSI, and that's going to be our relative signal strength index for the Wi-Fi. And then we've got the uptime function there as well. And that uptime function just counts the time since the Shelly booted. I'll do a very quick latency test. So that is the Shelly 1 and Shelly Plus 1. Being able to add smarts to even low voltage switches with these units is the clear benefit over some of the other Shellys, such as the dimmer. Now, it was interesting to see that the Plus one had a little trouble pairing with Home Assistant. As I mentioned, I think I may just need to reset this and repair it, and it'll probably be just fine. I really have had no issues with the Shellys I've tested so far. As usual, the Home Assistant integration we showed was very simple, and the latency seems to be quite minimal. With the easily accessible GPIO pins on both units, it should be relatively easy to flash your own custom firmware if you wanted to, such as ESP Home or TAS Motor, making them even more customizable. Now, with the current setup where the Plus one is not actually pairing to Home Assistant, with the Shelly one being $20 and the Plus one being an extra $19, I can't say that I see the additional value in the Plus one, other than the fact that the Plus one seems to be able to handle more DC voltage through the relay. That said, I've seen conflicting information about what the Shelly Plus one can actually handle, because on the casing it says 30 volts, whereas in the document we saw before it said 240 volts. So I'm not really sure what to believe there. I'm going to go with 30 volts just to be on the safe side. It's pretty rare that you would be running something at 240 volts DC anyway. With both of them having a 16 amp rating as well as the max on 240 volts, there's not a whole lot of difference there. I think the core difference really is going to be that the Shelly Plus one has that Bluetooth radio embedded as well, so that you can control it locally with just a connection from a Bluetooth phone. Now, the question might come up as to why you would want to be running these off and switching a DC load. Well, there's a couple of different use cases that you might need a DC switch for. Because of the isolated relay on these, it's actually pretty reasonable to run one of these Shellys as a trigger for a garage door remote. You see, most garage door remote buttons are just a button that connects two contacts on the garage door opener. You could extend the wires to that button and put them through the relay terminals, and it's just going to bridge that button. And because, as you saw in the settings, you can turn it off automatically after it comes on, you can set this up to basically be a momentary switch. The other thing that both the 12 and 24 volt DC functionality of both of these units makes possible is using them in perhaps a caravan or camper situation to trigger your lights on and off if you are perhaps doing the van life. Honestly, I'd say the Shelly one is probably the better value for money, considering it's basically a turnkey solution, and without locking you out of the customization and the 16 amp rating, it's pretty hard to beat the Shelly one at the $20 price. The Shelly One Plus is still pretty great, but the extra $19 for Bluetooth functionality, when it seems a bit difficult to get into Home Assistant, may not be justifiable. I will post in the comments down below if I manage to get the Shelly One Plus to work over the next few days. There are plenty more Shelly products that I want to try out, so let me know your thoughts on the Shelly One and Plus one, or what your favorite Shelly is in the comment section down below. That's all we have for this video, and I do hope that it helped you in your home automation journey. Be sure to drop a comment down below with a home automation idea that you'd like to see me cover in a future video. And don't forget to follow HiveMind Automation on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button down below to give it a like, and if you're not already subscribed, please consider changing that now. While you're at it, if you hit the bell icon, you'll get a notification when I release a new video, and that's normally each week. Lastly, if you enjoy what I'm doing here and you want to help to support the channel, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description down below. Contributions that you make through Buy Me a Coffee get put towards making more and hopefully better content for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.